Hi everyone, welcome and good evening. My name is Lauren Artilles on behalf of Harvard Bookstore. I'm pleased to introduce this virtual event with Zaina Arafat presenting her new novel, You Exist Too Much, in conversation with TONY TULATHIMUTTE. I hope you're all well and safe. Thank you for joining us virtually tonight. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our community and our new digital community during these challenging times. Every week, we'll be hosting events here on our Zoom account, and just like always, our event schedule will appear on our website at harvard.com, and you can sign up for our email newsletter for more updates. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk tonight, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get through as many as time allows. In the chat, I'll be posting a link to purchase You Exist Too Much on harvard.com, as well as a link to donate in support of this series and our store. Your purchases and financial contributions make events like tonight's possible and help ensure the future of a landmark independent bookstore. So thank you for tuning in and showing up. In support of our authors and the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore, we sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings these past few months, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them as quickly as we can. Thank you for your patience and understanding. And now I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Zaina Arafat's stories and essays have appeared in publications including the New York Times, Granta, The Believer, Virginia Quarterly Review, The Washington Post, and NPR. She holds an MA in International Affairs from Columbia University and an MFA from the University of Iowa, and is the recipient of the Arab Women Migrants from the Middle East Fellowship at Jack Jones Literary Arts. She grew up between the United States and the Middle East and currently lives in Brooklyn. TONY TULATHIMUTTE is the author of the novel Private Citizens, which was called the first great millennial novel by New York Magazine. A graduate of Stanford University and the Iowa Writers Workshop, he has written for the New York Times, Vice, Wired, N+1, Playboy, The New Yorker, The New Republic, and others. He's received a Whiting Award and an O. Henry Award and currently runs Crit, a writing class in Brooklyn. Tonight, they'll be discussing Zaina's debut novel, You Exist Too Much, in which she follows her protagonist between the US and the Middle East into a treatment center for love addiction and through the imbricated circles of her identity as she attempts to square her more destructive impulses with her longing for connection. Refinery29 calls it an extraordinary debut and says Zaina's lyrical, provocative writing is wholly captivating, startling in its honesty, and unsettling in all the best ways. And TONY says, You Exist Too Much gets desire at a deep level, where it comes from, how it pushes and tugs, and how it's virtually never just about who it's about, noting Zaina Arafat speaks for the persistently hungry. And now I'm honored to turn things over to our moderators. The digital podium is yours, Zaina and TONY.
Thank you for those lovely introductions. Hi, TONY.
Hi, what's up?
How are you? I suppose I'll start by reading from the book. I'm going to read from somewhere in the early chapters, but it doesn't really need any setup. So, all right. Okay. Where do you live? The professor wrote me. We'd met the previous summer, almost a year earlier. She taught French literature at the Alliance Française in Midtown East, in between semesters at Columbia. On the first day of class, she had announced that the past students had told her she didn't smile enough. So she put her palms on the edge of the desk and leaned forward, smiling, as if to say, here you go. I'd loved her since the day she kept me after class and suggested I was too harsh on Emma Bovary for her childish fantasies and for cheating on Charles. Emma's pathetic, sure, she said, pressing a polished fingernail to the word méprisable on my paper. From the dinosaur band-aid on that same finger, I surmised a husband and kids. But this is melodramatic. She looked at me, paused, then offered an effortful smile. For the first time, I noticed the dimple that appeared above her lip when she smiled, like a second, smaller smile. While we stood there, I began to fall into its span. As I gathered up my things and walked towards the classroom door, she asked, Is it so bad? I stopped and turned towards her. Is what so bad? To have an affair? She asked. Her question seared. It felt both suggestive and forgiving. At the time, a photo of Eliot Spitzer and his scorned wife, Silda, adorned the front page of the New York Post. I felt myself blush. I don't know, I said, but it is in this country. She laughed. Her laugh was deep and started in the back of her throat, getting increasingly lighter as it worked its way forward. True, she said. My body surged with heat. When I got home that night, I Googled her. I discovered that she wrote fiction. A short story with her byline came up, a simple piece about a woman struggling to keep her marriage intact as the other couples in their circle divorced. I wondered if it was based on truth, and I searched for details that matched her reality as I knew it. During class the following week, I made a point to mention it. I read your story, I said, nervous to admit it and tingling with excitement, as though I'd accessed some part of her that was now laid bare between us. Oh, she said. She nodded once, then offered the smile. Thank you. She appeared not to care whether I liked it, confident that it was good without my approval. Still, I felt encouraged to say, it would be nice to meet up sometime, maybe after the class is over. She nodded in return. It would. We met in early September at the Nespresso store in Midtown East, 3 blocks from our classroom. I showed up in a pencil skirt and a silk sleeveless shirt. The conversation flowed. She talked about walking her daughter to school, her husband's startup, their vacation home in Saint-Paul-de-Vence on the Côte d'Azur. I tried to match her level of privilege and exposure. I've been to Nice once, I said. I didn't mention that I'd gone with Kate, my ex-girlfriend, towards the end of our relationship. I was worried that, as a straight French woman, the entire concept of queerness would make her uncomfortable. We ordered cappuccinos. I resisted asking for skim milk so as not to seem too weight-conscious or too American. I felt slightly tipsy as we left, though we hadn't drank anything. When the bill came, I hesitantly asked if she would send me some of her unpublished writing to read. She placed her credit card on the table as I reached for my wallet, waving my hand away. You want to read more from me? She asked, sounding almost suspicious. I panicked. Until then, I'd felt emboldened, but her response was humbling. I thought I'd ask, I said, if that's okay. Sure, she said. She smiled again. It was starting to feel more natural anytime she did so. I'm just surprised is all. We stepped outside the cafe, and as we walked off in different directions, I felt overwhelmed. I wanted her life. I wanted to live inside her life while still living inside my own. I wanted, above all, for her to like me. 2 days later, when she still hadn't sent any of her work, I followed up. 3 essays arrived in my inbox that night. She seemed to be a guarded person, so reading her unpublished writing was like cutting to the front of a long line. I couldn't believe how much her inner world resembled mine. The problem was asymmetry. Not only was she straight, but she had a husband to share her inner world with. I presumably had Anna's world, my girlfriend at the time, yet somehow hers was never nearly as captivating. I read each of her essays several times. They're nice, I wrote in response, still afraid to shatter a veneer of detachment. A month later, we went to lunch, but I couldn't eat. I wore a dress that once belonged to my mother, her gold hoop earrings, her Michelle watch. Anything beautiful that's mine was once hers. Now that I'd read the professor's writing, now that her sapphire wedding ring was refracting light from every surface, I was too conscious of my motions to land the fork in my mouth, so I stopped trying. Sorry, I said, laughing dumbly. I can't eat and talk at the same time. She had chosen a place on the Upper West Side known for its burgers, but I ordered a salad. I imagined she was judging me in that moment. I'm familiar with that judgment, but still, how could I eat something so unsexy as a cheeseburger in front of the sexiest woman in the universe? She continued to look attractive and in control as she ate her burger, chewing with unapologetic authority. I had the ridiculous salad packed up, though I knew I'd never eat it. When the check came, I offered to pay. I'd looked up the place beforehand, cash only, and I fumbled self-consciously through bills fresh from the ATM. My eyes began to blur. I put down too much for the tip. We got up and left, and the minute she turned the corner from the restaurant, tears spilled down my cheeks. I was certain that I'd given myself away by not eating, though I admit, by then, a part of me wanted her to suspect. I'll stop there.
Nice job, Zaina.
Thank you.
You know, I mean, I think that reading gives a really good sort of introduction and taste of the overall approach of the book. Like, for one thing, it gets into a lot of stuff, right? We learn about the relationship with the mother. We learn about the narrator's eating disorder, about her sort of tendency to covet, you know, inaccessible or unavailable women, and almost like the unavailability itself constitutes the appeal. The more she thinks about the kind of life that this woman lives without her. But I don't know, one of these things about Q&As that I always find weird is that, like, we are going to have this deep conversation about a book that most people here, or some people here, might not have read yet. And I guess the place I want to start before we get into all that stuff is, you know, how would you introduce your own book to somebody who hasn't read it yet?
Great question. Geez, that's a tough one. I would say that I close my eyes, by the way, when I think sometimes. So I would say that this is a novel about a woman, a Palestinian American woman, who is tracing a pattern of relationships and obsessions with unattainable women against the backdrop of her Arab Muslim culture, and all while sort of coming to an understanding of, or at least coming to terms with, her relationship with her mother, who is a borderline personality. So all of those things are happening simultaneously in the book. That's how I would describe it.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, even on top of that too, there's like a sort of a hint of sort of intergenerational trauma that's happening with the mother growing up in under an occupation. There's love addiction. There's eating disorders, and you know, when I was reading this, I sort of thought, like, is this the beginning of a sort of post-intersectional literature here? Because, like, you can do an intersectional analysis on this, but it's so complex. It'd have to be like 5 or 6 dimensional, right? It's almost like it would obscure more than it reveals if you took that approach to it. So, you know, did you have some kind of like larger idea or concept that you were using to hold it together, rather than sort of be like, oh, this is about Palestinian American identity, or this is about queer romance, or this is about addiction, or any of that?
As it happens, I did. I mean, so 2 things. One, I'll start with the first one, which is that the first was this concept of like unattainability, really. And I wanted to explore the question of why somebody would set their sights on something that they don't have versus something that they do have, and why it is that like things in the distance can be more appealing, right, than what's at hand. And like initially I located that in love, and in like queer love, and I guess the unattainability stemmed from, in that case, you know, internalized homophobia, whereas like a person would set this narrator who is queer, you know, would sort of set her sights on women that she couldn't have because of the fact that it was a sort of safe place to love and to long, you know, from that vantage point. And then that unattainability started to echo outwards into her sort of cultural, political reality as a Palestinian, where, you know, well, in one sense, it's the cultural unattainability of living in between 2 worlds, where you really feel like you can't fully attain one world or the other. Like, she doesn't fully belong to the US, nor does she fully belong to Palestine. And then in terms of the political, you know, unattainability as a Palestinian, there's of course the fact that Palestinians can't attain statehood, they can't attain self-determination, they can't attain basic human rights. And so, I mean, I think that that was, just thinking about what you said about the intersectionality, I think that unattainability kind of cuts across all the intersections, as well as ideas steeped in 19th century existentialism, because I was a philosophy major. And I was just thinking a lot about like what it means to, what constitutes an individual, and, you know, choice, freedom, authenticity. She kind of grapples with all of these in all of those different contexts, in love, in her cultural heritage, in her political reality. So those are the like unifying themes, or the underlying themes, I should say.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting too, that the approach is that, usually the idea of queer theory, for example, would have you break down the idea of a binary, right? But there are some choices in life that really are binary, right? Like if you're a monogamous person, are you going to be with one person or another person? Are you going to be living in America, or are you going to be living in the motherland? You know, are you going to have a good relationship with somebody or a bad relationship, right? And I feel like so many things in this book kind of embody that that feeling of like, no matter what you pick, you're kind of screwed either way. Like, the character is a love addict, and she ends up developing a crush on her love addiction counselor. Like, to me, that's the most perfectly like double-edged situation to be in, right? Especially given that like love itself in books is usually like, the thing that's motivating characters, or it's a reward for a character, or like a consolation. And
Mhm.
here it is the problem itself, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think that like, insofar as it does allow of binaries, it's almost like, rather than say like, oh, I'm fluid and I can inhabit all of these things at once, it's saying I can have none of these things.
Actually, that's a really good point. And I hadn't thought about the fact that like there are some binaries that you just can't circumvent.
Yeah.
And in the case of this narrator, it's like she sort of, it's this feeling of having none of them in some sense, especially like being culturally in between. I mean, you don't, there's that expression like, oh, how lovely it is to have a foot in both worlds, but in some way you just feel like you have a foot in neither world. um, and I mean, I guess, you know, as you said, if you're a monogamous person, like you have to choose in some way. And I think choosing is a struggle for her also because it involves like self-acceptance.
Yeah, and to go back to the philosophy thing too, I mean, choice is at the heart of existentialism, which I think is like the philosophical tradition this book is engaged sort of most consciously in, right? Like, the word exist is in the title, the epigraph is by Kierkegaard.
Right.
Which, wait, do I have this in front of me? Can I pull this up really quickly and not have it be awkward? Probably. I'm not going to feel awkward if you don't.
Some existential.
Okay, yeah, here it is. It is pleasure disappoints, possibility never.
Right. That's the epigraph, from Kierkegaard, from Either or, which is a
Right,
book
exactly.
about, right. It's a sort of book about what kind of life one chooses to live.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like that I like that quote so much, and it to me just sort of like encapsulates so much of the book, because this narrator sort of lives in that realm of possibility, um, which is why she sets her sights on these unattainable women, is because, you know, you can just pour all sorts of fantasies into them, and there's no actuality to it.
Yeah, and a lot of what is like fun about the book too is, seeing the character try to have it both ways, or try to sort of shuttle between satisfying one desire and its own opposite, right? Like on the one hand, this character's Palestinian identity interferes with her relation with one relationship she has with a woman named Anna, and then in another she uses it to flirt with a different woman and like absolve her French colonial guilt. And so she's using the same tendency of herself, whatever, in opposing ways. And there's so much stuff here that's like that's double-edged like that. There's like a eating disorder recovery center called the Ledge, which it seems to be the opposite of what it says it is. But
Yeah, I mean, the treatment center is, it's questionable in terms of its like, what's the word? Effectiveness.
Yeah.
There's a better word, efficacy.
Efficacy.
Efficacy, right. And it's meant to be a sort of like homegrown kind of budget style, a slightly unprofessional place that's, you know, both ridiculous and endearing. I mean, and I wanted it to be that way because I just thought that it would, first of all, add levity. And then second of all, I guess I was sort of trying to question the, you know, I was trying to, I guess, play with the rehab trope in some way, and also to question the effectiveness of, like, you know, treatment and just like recovery, and you know, how these things, can they be like externally, how much of the process of overcoming one's addictions is internal versus like external, and how much do those external like structures play a role. I mean, I think what was most important about the Ledge was like the community that she found, because she's sort of very isolated and alienated as a person, like even in her, I mean, just by virtue of being like sort of closeted and internally homophobic. She doesn't have like a queer community in terms of being, her career as like a DJ. That's a very alienating job where you're just like by yourself, but you feel like you're among people. So I guess, yeah, I mean, I went off on a tangent, but I'm just thinking about the Ledge as, yeah, I was questioning its effectiveness.
Yeah, the DJ thing, I mean, congrats to you for writing literature's first sympathetic DJ. Not easy. But yeah, you know, I think that going back to the sort of dichotomous like attraction and repulsion this character feels like, I don't know about you, but like when I write Asian characters, for example, I always feel this this anxiety around like, is or how much are these characters' tendencies going to be read as expressions of their Asianness, right? Or like, is the reader going to think that I'm saying something about Asianness? And here you've sort of larded a lot of things into this one character, right? Like eating disorders, like love addiction. You know, were you ever worried about how this was going to be read through the filter of, this is a book about a Palestinian American protagonist by a Palestinian American author?
Yeah, you mean like the burden of representation? And
Yeah.
of course, I mean that, yes and no. Initially, I didn't think at all about the identity. I really didn't, my focus was more on the sort of like story itself versus the character and her identity, the identities that she represents. But as it came closer to, you know, becoming a book in the world, or at least like going out to agents and, you know, basically the submission process to agents, I did start to think more about that, because of the fact that I noticed a lot of, you know, agents read it through those, like through those lenses, right? It was like, oh, you know, this is a book about Palestinianness, or this is a book about queerness, or this is a book about, you know, eating disorders or whatever, or addiction. And so I started to think more about that. But at the same time, I mean, like so much of what I wanted to do was not have to think about that, because I feel as though it's its own form of oppression, where you have to, you know, create a character, like where your character is held to a standard of representing all Palestinian Americans or all bisexual people, which is of course absolutely like not the case. In the same way that, you know, a book where the protagonist is like a white cis man isn't speaking for all white cis men. And it just sort of betrays its own bias, I think, when people view the, you know, you know, cite the character as, you know, being representative of an entire community of people. However, at the same time, of course, I was, you know, conscious of the way I wanted to represent like a Palestinian American, for example, because there are so many misperceptions around Palestinians. And I wanted her sort of humanity to take to come through such that she could just seem like a person like anybody else, rather than, you know, what comes to mind when people think of Palestinians, which maybe is like rock throwers or like terrorists, right? Or I mean, a number of like things that are totally just stereotypical. So I was trying to balance my desire to not have to think about representation while also being fully aware that in some way I was but inevitably sort of held to that, holding myself in some way to the standard.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
So to go back to the philosophy stuff, you know, one thing I noticed was that it's not just in the title, in the Kierkegaard quote or whatever. I mean, Kierkegaard appears again later when she's in a Christian bookstore and she's flipping through either or. And she name drops Barth. There's a part where she buys clothes at some place called like Plato's Closet or something like that. But what if I was is that it's not just a book that's just like, oh, look at me, I'm engaged in a discourse of, you know, philosophical inquiry here, but it sort of puts it cheek to jowl against these other books which are like self-help books, right?
Yeah.
You know, she's constantly like, she reads like Facing Love Addiction at one point. She reads, she sees a guy next to her reading the book Why Men Love Bitches. You know, I'm really interested in like what the function of philosophy here, when you have these like two different types of like literature side by side with one another. I mean, is that just like, you know, a feature of this character's life? Are you making some kind of rhetorical point with it? Like,
I think that's a really excellent, I love that question, because what I've always thought, so when I went to college and discovered philosophy, I was like, holy moly, this is basically a guide for how to live your life, you know? These are books that, you know, try to answer these major questions, including like how to be a person, like how should one live one's life, you know, in order to be happy, in order to be ethical, and I found it so fascinating that more people that I hadn't encountered it until college, and that it wasn't like a known, or it was such a marginalized section of the bookstore, for example. Of course, people read fiction for reasons, you know, similar reasons, right? You can, I don't know, it reflects life in a way that guides as well. But there was something just so diluted about philosophy. And so I think that part of my motivation for including it wasn't just my interest in it as a person, or a desire to be like, to just sort of drop in those names, but to kind of suggest or wink to it as a maybe supplement or even like alternative to certain like self-help, the sort of trope of self-help books, which can be somewhat, I don't know, people sometimes poke fun at. I mean, I find self-help books to be useful as well, but I find philosophy to also be very helpful. So I wanted it to be a part of the story. Maybe I wanted to like to suggest that like actually philosophy has a lot of the answers that we're looking for.
Yeah, well, this is interesting because the book itself kind of completes this trifecta, right? If you have this extremely pragmatically minded self-help on the one hand, you have this very abstract hauteur of philosophy on the other hand. Then you have fiction, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm interested in you know, what you think about what the role of fiction is here, right? Do you think that it has this kind of ameliorative potential to it, that it can be therapeutic? Do you not believe in that? Do you believe that's closer to philosophy? Like, where would you place that?
You mean like fiction in the book, or just like fiction per se, or I mean not per se, but fiction like in general?
I guess fiction the way that you did it, right? Like in the form of this book.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I suppose I think that I wasn't thinking of fiction as in the case of this book. I think I just thought of this as a like, I don't know, maybe a process, like it was just like an active, I guess I'm just looking at the book thing, it's just like an active process of thought, and of like becoming, for at least for the character. And so maybe in the process of the process, it also does some work that a self-help book or like a philosophical text could do. Yeah, I mean, I don't think of this book as, it's sort of different from other novels, because of the fact that it's, I don't know, has a lot of philosophy in it, I guess, and maybe it has more of an idea-based plot somehow, or just like a different structured plot. So I guess in some way, yeah, maybe it is meant to be a hybrid of like fiction and philosophy, and I don't want to say self-help, but like fiction and philosophy, like a novel of process and ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does a good job of setting up at the very beginning this idea that like people, you know, you have to choose things and that your choices have consequences, and then seeing her stage each of these relationships along these different vectors of choice about whether she will go for it and leave herself vulnerable, or whether she will, you know, try to withhold and, you know, stop feeding her addictions and things like that. Makes it sort of a useful kind of, you know, proof of concept for a lot of the philosophical stuff it brings up, right?
Yeah, I do think so.
But more, I mean, more about the love addiction stuff. Like, I was sort of struck. I mean, I'm going to spoil a little bit of the book very vaguely, but you know, the book is structured as a sort of sequence of relationships, like you said, right? She ends up in a relationship, and the tone that the book ends on is uplifting and positive, I would say, right? I personally read that ending very cynically, because it's like, when you've seen how this character has acted in one relationship after another, you know, and what she's been through, she ends up in this relationship that she seems to think is totally healthy and healing. And I read it totally like, no, this is not going to last. You know, this is
really?
like, you know, yeah, this is like this kind of ironized ending where she is finally like brought herself to a place of stability that has enabled her desire to believe that love is real and healing and redemptive, even though that exact tendency has been disappointed again and again in the past. I guess what I'm asking you is love real? Do you think love is real?
I'm going to answer that, and I'm going to ask you how you knew, or what made you think that relationship was so, you know, not the happy ending that it maybe is meant to be. Is love real? I mean, yeah, love is real, but I do believe that love is real. I believe that love is often mistaken for, you know, one often mistakes other things for love. And I do really, I mean, this is corny, but like, I guess what I've learned as a human, and, you know, I think that the character made progress towards learning is that love has to come, like self-love. You have to sort of love yourself to be able to love anybody else. And that I know to be true. And I think that love is just a lot less, it's a lot simpler, I think, than it's, you know, depicted as being in, you know, film and sometimes literature. But I do believe that love is real. Yeah, I mean, I'm a believer in love. But I want to know why you think that last relationship was not as happy as it was intended to be.
Yeah. Well, I'm not gonna suggest that there was no like progress made over the course of the book. I do think that the reason it works as an ending is because like she enacts this kind of symbolic severance with her mother, right? By watching this like video of her, then turning it off and so that she could be with her partner, right? That said, like she's also felt pretty sure about stuff in the past before too, that she's like, you know, managed X or Y thing that she thought was the problem, and you know, and that it's going to work this time. And also it has this way of sort of idealizing the person she's with, that, you know, she's the hottest woman in the world and she can't watch me eat a hamburger or something, right? So you know, that's sort of why I'm just like, you know, okay, well, the sort of arc of the book has been completed, this sort of digesting of the presence of this mother and this person's love affairs. But I still feel like there's just like so much going on with this character that I could easily see them sort of back in treatment or back to sort of square one, and then thinking like, well, I've got to dig deeper, you know?
No, I think that's questionable. I think you're right to be suspicious and like skeptical. Because you're right. I mean, she arrives at these relationships with such conviction. Um, and the reader can usually tell that like it's not going to end well. In this case, I think, it's uncertain whether it's going to last, but it is, I think I think that's the point in some ways, that like, yeah, she doesn't make, I mean, you can't fully overcome yourself, at least in her case, but she's made some steps towards progress, especially insofar as accepting, I guess, herself as like queer, and part of her journey has been not only like accepting herself, but like being authentic, and that means like being honest with the people around her, including her family and especially her mother. And so like I think that trajectory is really the one that's like kind of comes to fruition more than her finding love. I mean, really, sometimes I woke up recently and I was like, shouldn't she just end up alone in some way? Like, because maybe the best course for her is to be in no relationship. Probably. But then at the same time, I mean, like, she needs to be, I wanted her to arrive at something that would the stakes would feel high enough for her, and the cost of losing would feel high enough that she felt compelled to be honest and authentic with like herself and her family.
Yeah.
So she didn't risk sabotaging it, because that's
Yeah. I mean, it is one of those things where like you've already established so well earlier in the book that like there's no, as long as you are playing this game of like either or, there's no conclusion that is both satisfactory and certain, right? Like if you settle on one side or another, it's been conclusively, exhaustively demonstrated that that's not going to work out, right?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I felt like I liked the ending for this reason, that it was open and ambivalent, because, to answer it would almost sort of be dishonest. It would be kind of heroizing or coming to sort of pat a conclusion about the character. And here we're like, we get the pleasure of having her in a moment of happiness, but it's still an open ending as far as I'm concerned. But
yeah, no, it is an open ending, and I want it to be an open ending. I kind of like that it's an open ending.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to turn over the things to the audience really quick, but before we do this, I feel like nobody has done this in any of your events yet. You have one of the most interesting brains of anybody I know. Part of this is because you have this talent for dates, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but like you don't forget dates ever, right? Like if you hear a date, I think that I mentioned my birthday to you once 10 years ago, and you still remember it. You also are able to tell the day of the week for any day of the year, and apparently your powers have been on the wane recently. And are only applying to the year that we're currently in, 2020.
Yeah.
But I kind of wanted to test this. So this is an audience interaction portion of the event. If anybody would like to volunteer their birthday, please go to the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom window. Type in the day and month of your birthday, and Zaina will tell you very quickly what the day of the week it is this year. And I'm going to make you close your eyes so that you can't Google this. All right. Yeah, close your eyes. Show us your hands so you're not doing anything. All right. Here's the first one. You ready?
Yeah.
Close your eyes.
Okay.
February 26th.
Wait, hold on. February 26th of this past year?
Yeah. It
was a Wednesday.
All right. I'm gonna look this up. Feb 26. It is, wait, it doesn't say on Google. Okay. February 26th was a Wednesday. That is correct. 1 out of 1.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. August 13th.
August 13th?
Yeah.
It's a Thursday.
Wow, shit, that was quick. Okay, August 13th is next month. That's a Thursday, correct. Okay, one more, and then we will open it up for questions. December 30th.
Sorry, what?
December 30th.
December 30th of like this coming year?
Oh, you're stalling. I can tell you're stalling.
No, I'm not stalling. I'm actually asking. December 30th of this coming year. Okay. Oh my goodness, that's a hard one. It is a Monday.
Wrong.
Damn
Oh my
it.
God, this is the first time I've ever seen you mess
That
this
was
up.
a hard one. Is a Sunday?
It's a Wednesday.
Ah!
Oh man.
Okay,
Oh,
but I
but
got
everything
the
was on the line. You
But I
blew
got the
it.
other two. Come on, the other two was pretty good. Now I want to do one more.
Okay. Well, okay. Do mine. September 1st.
September 1st is a Tuesday.
I don't even know this. Correct. September 1st is a Tuesday.
Man, I did get one wrong though.
Yeah, you got one wrong. You're gonna have to make it up with amazing answers for this Q&A section. So yeah, please type your Q&A questions into the chat. If I don't have any on the queue, then I'll just keep on yammering on, but nobody wants that. So
Ask me a question.
yeah, ask her anything. Fire away. We've got nothing so far, so I'm going to just kind of putter around and vamp until we've got something. Oh, okay. Actually, here's my question.
Okay.
There's a scene in the book where she accidentally buys a camel.
Oh yeah.
She is hoodwinked into somebody on vacation into buying a camel because he doesn't understand what he's saying to her. What happened to the camel?
She still owns that camel. She still owns
Okay,
that.
yeah, but where is it? Like, did she just abandon it?
No, it lives in Egypt near the pyramids, and it has caretakers. She didn't want to take it out of its natural environment, and that's not cool. But she sends it money for school supplies and for new drapes and like what's that thing called, saddle, all that business.
Yeah.
So yeah, she still has the camel, and she does take care of it.
Fun fact, you know that quote in the Bible about like how it's harder for a rich man to enter heaven than it is for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle? I just learned that that's a mistranslation, and that camel should actually be large rope. It's just like a word that sounds very similar to that.
I don't know anything about. I don't know about Bible verses. Sorry, I zoned out.
I just read that and I thought it was interesting. I'm just vamping for time while these questions roll.
Somebody asked a question.
Okay, yeah, okay. I've got a couple now. Here's the first one. Were there any sections you originally wrote for this that you ended up having to cut that were especially difficult? And or what is your process for editing your own work?
I'll talk about that's a hard question. But good, great question. Yes, there were sections that I had to cut that were hard to cut, and those sections usually involved, I guess, like storylines, romantic storylines that didn't add to sort of revealing her character in some way, or else like helping her character progress, where they were just like, and so those I cut. And then my editing process, I mean, the whole writing a book is basically editing a book. I mean, like, I guess the whole, because I feel like the whole process of writing this book was really a process of editing, because I sort of wrote the draft, I guess, kind of in a contained amount of time, and then spent like years editing it. But I suppose the editing process looked like this. It looked like pages of my book taped to the wall, and trying to arrange them in such a way that they made sense, because what the structure is, often you'll get like a flashback in the middle of like a present day scene, and there aren't always like easy, smooth transitions. And for that reason, the previous scene in the present day has to really like signal why this flashback is happening now, and this in the same way the scene on the other end, like when you return back to the present day, it has to pick up in a way that we understand why we got the flashback. So I spent a lot of time like structuring the book and doing that like by literally just like taping pages and moving them around and going nuts and taking, I was in workshops, and so I would get feedback, and I would always be really defensive at first and like cry. But then, after like I would sit with the feedback for a few days or a week, and then I would, whatever remained in my head or what rose to the surface was what I would incorporate.
Yeah, so you're one of those like physical editors. Like Kathleen Alcott is sort of like that. She has to tape every page of what she's working on the walls around her. And I think that she actually literally had to leave town because she needed a place big enough to like tape up all the pages of like a 500-page novel on the walls around her. But yeah, I couldn't be me. I don't understand that approach at all. Okay, more questions. This is our quickie. Why was December 30th hard? AKA, how do you do that?
I have no idea. I swear to you, I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, okay, I do know. It's really quick deductive reasoning.
You say that, but I feel like I have decently quick deductive reasoning, and I can't. It would take me all day to do that. I could only do it by counting up. There's no way that's quick deductive reasoning. It probably feels like that.
I don't know. The answer then is I don't know, but I do think it's really quick deductive reasoning.
Yeah. Okay. This one's kind of a open-ended one, but says, can you talk more about the Palestinian aspect of the story? I haven't read the novel yet, but this part intrigued me for personal reasons, and I don't see many books like this. Anything you feel like talking about?
Yeah, I mean, so the Palestinian aspect of the book is, so it's essentially, you mentioned in the beginning, like intergenerational trauma, and I think of it, that's right. And I think of it in the sense of this book as like the parents, so the narrator's experiences of Palestine, by virtue of the fact that she's Palestinian American, involve like spending entire summers of her childhood in Palestine and traveling back for various other reasons. And, also, so that's one way of encountering Palestine. The other way is encountering it through television, growing up in like the 80s and, well, the 80s and the 90s, and just all the scenes from, the Intifada and then like Oslo and Madrid and all of that, and just like receiving all of that and kind of internalizing all of that. And then through her parents who grew up under occupation and, they have their own trauma as a result of like growing up between these wars, 67, 48, 67, 73. And how not necessarily that like trickles into the narrator, but how like their trauma affects her because of the fact that they're traumatized people raising children. And I think a large part of this character's journey is understanding Palestine as vis-a-vis her parents, so that she can arrive at a place of like empathy in a sense for them as parents, because some of their actions have been really hard for her. And also, I guess the Palestinianness is something that's like very much like she has this constant longing for people, for women, for home, for country. And I think so much of that is emblematic of her Palestinianness, because Palestinians, I mean, we've lived in the state of longing for, since 48, so it's just so ingrained in you. And I just, yeah, that was, and those are the ways I think that the Palestinianness most impacts or are present in the book.
Yeah, that is, I think, a really neat solution to this issue of like being a first generation kid of immigrants like I am, and thinking about how to honestly write about an experience that you've not had firsthand, but nonetheless affects you, right? It affects you through your parents and through the relationship you have with them. you know, and I feel like there is a genre of literature by like first gen writers who feel that, you know, they feel this duty to somehow recreate or even sometimes co-opt the struggle of their parents. And you know, I can see it's totally understandable. Like they want to do it honor, they want to tell a story about their parents that their parents weren't able to themselves. And I think that is in itself honorable, but it's also not sort of the only way to do it, right?
Totally.
I feel like Jenny Zhang's Sour Heart is another example of a book that does this, like the sort of way of just thinking about your relationships with somebody who went through it, rather than sort of mimetically recreating it, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It would have felt like disingenuous in some way to claim the trauma as much as to like realize the way that this character was like affected by this trauma. So
Yeah.
I love, yeah, and she does that so well. The way, yeah, the reference to Sour Heart is beautiful. Beautiful book.
It says, here's another question. It's interesting that you said agents were categorizing the book in a way you didn't expect. How were you originally pitching the book when you sent it out?
As a love story, or like a series of love stories, you know? That's what I thought it was. Like, it's just a story, you know? It's a story. And about unrequited love and why, you know, anyone would continue to fall in unrequited love. And when they started to categorize it, I was at first like, you know, a little bit put off. I mean, there were agents that were like, we want more spices from the marketplace. You know, we want more camels. Okay,
the milky scent of chai wafting through the marketplace.
Exactly. I was like, you want to staple a spice back to the front cover. But like, and then I started to, you know, at first I sort of was like, what? But then I was like, okay, I appreciate and understand that there's a hunger for understanding from, you know, in the best positive interpretation, there's like a hunger for more understanding of like Palestine, of Arabs, of Arab culture. And so then I really did appreciate that. But I also I wasn't going to overly cater to that, because then I think what they really wanted was me to sort of continue telling the same story that's familiar and that, you know, that Arabs and Arab stories are allowed to look like, and I didn't want to do that. So I gave one camel, as Tony mentioned.
Yeah, and you own that camel. So.
Sorry, the narrator owns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you said agents were, oh, sorry, just read that one. Moving on. I just read Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong, and being a writer who deals with white gaze and struggling with her authentic voice writing, can you relate to that or share your thoughts on that?
Minor Feelings is my favorite book of the spring. I mean, I love that book. It's so good.
It's really fun.
Of course, what'd you say?
It's really fun, yeah.
It's so good. I mean, I think it's really great. And of course, I relate to the white gaze, and I relate to a lot of the sort of like emotions that she expresses in that book. And I think, I mean, it's so pervasive in just even like, yeah, the sort of, just even when people see certain words, like they want a certain thing. And like I don't want to, it's not like I want to cite reviews of my book, but like, I think I did actually read one review where the character, I was like the reviewer, I just felt like, maybe my point is that like I can see how there are these expectations when you mention like Palestine or Palestinian or even like queer, and there are expectations in a reader's head that if you don't cater to that, if you don't, meet them, you're sort of like, I don't know, ostracized, or I don't know what the word is. I found that there are a lot of Orientalist expectations when it comes to seeing words like Palestine attached to a book. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Forget
and so, good follow-up to this is the next question. How much of the book is based on your own experiences as a queer Palestinian American writer?
Good question. I would say that I mean, I'll be honest. I'll answer I'll answer you honestly and say that I'm queer and I'm Palestinian American, and I don't know why anyone I don't think, I think a lot of my, this is the most honest I think I've ever spoken, but I think that a part of writing, well, no, I'm not going to say that. I'll say that what was really true to my experience was the struggle of like queerness against my own Palestinian Muslim heritage, and also like the struggle, I suppose, of my family and my parents and their sort of trauma that shaped the way that they, you know, raised us, and trying to kind of come to terms with that. The specific romances and the plot itself, I guess, is less based on my life. I mean, those parts are not really based on my life, but yeah, the identity markers of the protagonist and her, those overarching struggles certainly are derived from life for me. So
yeah, it would be so easy with a book like this to just assume that it was you because the hyper specificity of all these coordinating identity markers seems to point to you, right? And I feel like there is a sort of yet to crest wave of fiction. This again might be the beginning, where it's just like it's like a sort of version of autofiction where it's just like, yeah, I'm going to tempt you into thinking this is me by deploying all these markers I share. But I'm going to, kind of short circuit those expectations, right?
yeah, totally. You're right. That is like a wave that's cresting right now. I think
yeah. Okay, next question. Are there any particular authors who've inspired you in your thinking and writing?
What? Sorry.
Are there any particular authors who have inspired you in your thinking and writing?
Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Maggie Nelson.
The same breath.
I know. Right. Edward Said, I guess Garth Greenwell, yeah, Carmen Machado, Tony Tulatumitte, and who else? I mean, my God, it's so many. It's hard to come up with all of them, but those are a few. Let me think of others. My major, honestly, like this sounds pretentious, but like the main, for me, I guess my primary influences were like Flaubert and Proust. Swan's Way, that like is a huge sort of guide for me, as well as like Flaubert and Madame Bovary. I mean, I always think of my character as being a little bit like Emma Bovary-ish. I mean, I referenced her in that section that I read, but just in how sort of that like her romanticism and constant longing for what she doesn't have. So
yeah. That's really okay. That's very interesting to me because all the fiction writers, the literary writers that you're pointing out, are like the sexiest writers, right? Like Garth and Carmen and Flaubert and Proust and all of the philosophers you picked out are like incels.
Totally, they're not like, it's not like Camus and like, who's very handsome by the way, Camus or Sartre or like Simone de Beauvoir, or like, no, Kierkegaard and Nietzsche are not like sexy.
Yeah.
They're not. Although, yeah, to me they are.
Yeah, I mean, like Nietzsche especially, just kind of like coughing his lungs out, just like writing about power, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's true. He's really a piece of work.
Okay, last question. What are you working on now?
I find that I get tremendous anxiety when I talk about it, but I'll say that I'm working on a collection of essays that basically revolves around Arabs and Muslims in the diaspora, and who are living in between states, both in the diaspora and also, I guess, in their home countries as well. And I also am finding that a lot of my essays seem to consider love in some contexts. So that's what I'm working on now.
Wonderful. Well, Zaina Arafat, everybody, thank you very much. I'm going to toss it back to the Harvard bookstore now, and that's the end of me.
Thank you, everyone, so much for being here. It means a lot, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening and great weekend.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Zaina and Tony, for that fantastic conversation. It was a real pleasure to spend my Friday night hanging out with you guys. And thank you to everyone out there for spending your evening with us. Please learn more about this remarkable book and purchase You Exist Too Much at harvard.com. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, have a good weekend, keep reading, and stay safe. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.